So the reason why I wanted to come over and talk to you today, Patrick, is that I got turned on to your product. Actually, it's right here, the Happy Endings tea mix. When I was visiting Wonderland Nursery, just south of here in Humboldt. And it was Kevin Chaudhry who told me about it, and he had one of your big, 55-gallon drums or whatever, and he was all excited that it had just gotten delivered, and I'm all like, all right, well, if Kevin Chaudhry is a inspiration to me, and I take his advice as being really high quality, and he's all excited because he's got a new 55-gallon drum of your product. I'm all like, what the hell is this product, right? And so I got just a few bags of it, right?
Uh-huh.
And I can admit I don't have a lot of experience with compost tea, but I had some. And then I used yours, and it did two things that I had never really come across before. Number one, the stuff foamed an amazing amount, it was coming out of my buckets. And I'm going to ask you about the foam in a moment, but my response was, if I think I'm looking for foam and this has got a ton of foam, maybe that's some kind of benchmark of good, right? So I'm like, all right, I like that. But the real test was when I started pouring it on my plants. I was feeding, once and a half, or 1 or 2 times a week with it straight at 100%. But then I was also diluting it down to like 30% and using it foliar. And it took under a week for everybody to perk back up, the colors to darken, and when the plant's in a really good mood and it's sunshine, the leaves come up and they what we call praying, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's praying or saluting. I like
That's
that
right.
too.
That's
So I was like, what is this stuff, right?
It's magic.
And it's magic.
That's right.
And so I started. So then I started I kind of started hunting you down, and we crossed paths a couple times. And so now I'm to the point now that I'm recommending this to people.
Awesome.
And I'm realizing that it would be good for everybody if I stopped by here at your lab and asked you some of the general questions that everybody asks me, so that instead of me trying to do it myself every time, I could just send them the link, right?
Absolutely.
So the first couple questions I have for you are going to be real basic stuff.
Okay.
And then I've got a couple that for the people who already know about compost tea and are interested to know more, and then we'll be done. So let's start out the very basics. A lot of people, especially the indoor scene, folks have been trained to use bottled nutrients, some of them synthetic, some of them high in salts. And they all have different roles, but the natural, the organic, the healthier compost folks, all of them come back to, you can dump almost all that stuff and just go with compost tea. But honestly, a lot of people are like, all right, I know compost tea is good, but I don't know why. So what is it about compost tea that makes it so great for both your cannabis plants and also your food and ornamental plants at home?
Well, all plants. It's actually an amazing thing that there's a lot of research going on right now, but basically what we're looking at is in nature's way of feeding plants is done through a biological system in the soil between the roots and the soil with they call it the mycorrhizae system as a general term, which involves the roots, bacteria, fungus, different little animals in the soil. And basically what a compost tea is you're making an incubator for those beneficial organisms that help feed your plants. So a compost tea brewer is water, air, and your initial starting, whatever you're starting with bacteria, either from worm castings or powdered mycorrhizae that you can buy that they've cultivated in farms. Bokashi is another good starting point. Root balls from local healthy soil is another good starting point. But basically the idea of a compost tea is you're incubating the beneficial bacteria and feeding it back into your plants, millionfold, a billionfold. So you're just boosting that natural system up into overdrive. Now, one thing you have to be weary of is that the tea brewer is an incubator, so you have to be careful of what you put in is going to multiply under the right circumstances. So you want to stay away from fresh guanos for E. coli, because then you could actually
In a
create
poisoning situation.
a biohazard. And I've heard tales of a few people getting sick over it, but basically you're going to incubate the
But your
biology.
product doesn't have any
Absolutely
guanos,
no,
right?
no. If you're going to use guanos, which you can if you want more of a fertilizer tea, is I suggest you add them after the brewing process, so there's not a chance for the multiplication to happen. But that's basically compost teas in a nutshell, and they are an amazing. There's many ways to brew them. And they do benefit almost every plant I've ever put on them. Citrus growers in Florida are big on it, so it just boosts that natural biology in the soil.
Right on. So you're taking a living soil environment where you would normally have these healthy microbes, and by brewing a compost tea and adding it, you're creating this like bionic soil where everything's so much more thriving. And do I understand it correctly that generally speaking, what's happening is this microbe community that you're feeding, which is in the rhizosphere, right, which is the area around the roots.
Yes.
It essentially makes a buffet in the soil. So whatever your plant, whether it be cannabis or whatever, all of the inputs that the plant wants are there at its beck and call. So it doesn't have to struggle to get them. They're all there.
No, and that's a big misconception is okay, we have to add phosphorus when it's flowering. But in nature, if you think about it, a fruit tree doesn't go to another area when it needs nitrogen or it needs phosphorus. If it's there, it takes it when it needs it. And some of the research that's done is there's a little receptors that actually leave the root to look for what they need. So there'll be a receptor for nitrogen or phosphate or potassium. So if you build a real healthy soil, it takes things when they need it. The salt-based nutrients are charged particles and when you put them in water. So that's basically the mechanism to go into the root. Nothing will move in nature unless it's being pushed or pulled, and it's either gravity pulling it down or plus and minus charges. And so salts are really a delicate thing because they're kind of force fed. It's kind of like shoving an IV into the root. The root has no control of any.
It's kind of like force feeding.
It's actually much like force feeding. So there is a place for salts in nature. They're a good transport agent, but it's kind of, I look at it like a meal. We eat things that used to be alive. Every culture in the world eats things that used to be alive because it has all the elements of life and things that used to be living. But adding a little bit of salt or a spice is really important for that meal to taste better. And I look at a lot that way in nature. There's some good natural salts to use. I would never use a synthetic salt, but Epsom salt is one natural salt that's a real good magnesium source. So carbon-based nutrients are kind of the key. And for a while, the industry was real big on salts, but again, they're tricky to use and they can burn plants and it's just not as good as organic. A Miracle-Gro tomato is not as good as a chicken guano or chicken poop tomato.
Well, I know that
my
parents' generation, everybody was in love with like chemistry and technology and science was going to solve everything, right? And sometimes you go down that path enough and you realize, okay, actually, if we come all the way back to how nature does stuff itself, we're actually going to get much better results. And
absolutely, and you know where the salts originally came from? Mm-hmm. They were leftover bomb-making material from World War II.
Oh, and so
the nitrates are very.
And so they were trying to figure out ways to use them.
Yeah, and it turns out plants, it was like, putting plants on steroids. But they also poison the soil. They poison the water supply. So there's a lot of downsides to the salt chemicals.
A funny side note, I was actually once stopped at an airport by TSA because I had, not yours, but somebody else's compost tea packets that I had gotten at a convention as samples. And as soon as they read fertilizer, they ran all the bomb tests on them.
Yeah,
and I'm like, really, dude, I'm just organic, but that was funny.
So ammonium nitrate is that one.
Oh, well, it triggered the supervisors.
It's explosive.
So, all right. So a compost tea brewer. Uh-huh. When I first learned about that, I'm like, oh my God, I need to get this like some kind of piece of technology to be able to brew this. And it wasn't until I actually watched some of your videos online that I realized that a compost tea brewer is not really like some kind of sensational piece of technology that's difficult. It's essentially And I also realized it. So you need to feed, oxygen into it. And I tried it with just a simple aquarium bubbler, which didn't have enough oomph, right?
You need a lot of air.
So you need a pretty good sized, still only like $20, but you need a decent sized air pump, and it's going to be bubbling into a 5-gallon bucket that you can get in any hardware store, and you put in water, and then you put in the product, and then it just goes. So it sounds like it's a piece of gear, but it's not really.
It's really, basically you're setting up. You need a water sample. You need a vessel for the water and the tea that you put in, and a good air source. There's different methods of circulating the water, or air stones are real simple and cheap. Yeah, you could get started you want a really good air pump is as much as you can afford. You can't go too big of air. So an air pump, a good clean air stone, some clean water. You want to stay with the chlorine is in municipal water to keep the biological activity from happening. So the less chlorine, the better. And whether you're on a well or you can dechlorinate your water in different ways.
You can also collect rainwater, which is how I like to do it.
That's a great place. Stream water, lake water will all brew some amazing teas. So the water is important. The water, the air, and the temperature are kind of the main variables that you're dealing with. And as far as the inputs, there's an infinite a variety of inputs. But if you're using good, healthy organisms that break down soil, like what's naturally in a compost, what's naturally in the belly of a worm, so the worm castings have all that natural or biological activity. So what we want to do is multiply those, and that's the basic idea of a tea. And it just turns out it works really well. And you also have to feed. We didn't talk a whole lot about that. You need, in order for something to live, it needs food, water, a place to live, and oxygen. So that's what we're providing. The simplest form of food is a sugar, because that's what the simplest form of food is, and all life loves sugar. So you can use molasses or any kind of good sugar. You can also use starches. Fish have a lot of nutrients in sugar, but it takes a little longer to brew because you got to break down those starches into simple sugar.
With your product, though, do you have to add molasses?
No, everything's in there. We have a nice powdered molasses source that's not real strong. It's like the bark or something. It's kind of flaky, but turns out, it feeds them really nicely.
And that's honestly one of the things that I liked about your product, because I'm busy doing everything else. And sometimes I'll read online that people have got these complex recipes and all these things I need to buy. And really, I need this to be kind of like a set it and forget it thing.
That's what I needed too.
Yeah, right?
That's
So I just take the bag, or not the whole bag, but I scoop out what I need for my 5-gallon bucket, and I put in my air, and I'm done, right? It's not like I need to make, also go get the molasses and all that kind of stuff. So I like the kind of one-stop shopping vibe of it.
It's a great starter. It has everything you need. But again, if you can add some local biology, like if you can go out to a local soil that's healthy and add some of those root masses into that, or worm castings or compost, that's all beneficial. You're going to add it in. There's plenty inside of this, like all the meals, the fish bone, and the crab, they all covered in bacteria. So once you put it in the water, it activates and it all starts breaking down. So there's plenty of bacteria in the tea mix, but it never hurts to add some more that's local.
One of my buddies who uses your stuff, and it was funny because I always thought his plants were good, but I didn't know he used your stuff until afterwards. He actually also takes just like grasses from his yard and just chucks them on in there. And he started doing that for just simple like FPJs, like fermented plant juices, and he's like, well, I'm gonna put it in my compost tea too, and all of those grasses are filled with are covered by local microbes.
Absolutely. And not only that, things like a place to live. I have diatomaceous earth in my tea, which is a lot of surface area molecule, so that's a real nice house for them. But some people throw in hay. Just have them some surface area that they can grab onto, or instead of
so they're not just floating around. They're like holding on.
I think it's easier for a lot of animals to have a place to grab onto.
I like that you said they need a home. I like that. That makes a lot of sense to me.
It's like that's universal.
Yeah, something to anchor onto. Yeah. All right. So now the part I was really interested in the foam part, right? Because before I became a little more dedicated to your product. I tried some other stuff, and since I'm in the industry, people are constantly giving me stuff to trial, and I try everything because I want to stay educated. Well, some of the stuff doesn't foam very much, right? And you email their customer service, and they're like, it's fine, it's a good product, whatever. But then I used your stuff, and it just like it really foams well. And I'm not, if somebody's thinking about using it, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to make a mess. It's not like it's always. It's not like it's like that kind of a mess. But if you've got a 5-gallon bucket, sometimes it'll foam up an inch, but the foam is thick, and so it stands up. And so it's not making a mess, but intuitively, I want to think that's some alive stuff, right? Because it's making the foam. And I don't know if that's true or not. So what makes the foam?
That's how I look. We're multiplying living organisms. Living organisms produce CO2. So once they turn oxygen and sugar into CO2. So to me, the foam is an indication of the biological activity in the tea. When you start off, there's very little, and then it'll go through a growth cycle. And you have to kind of figure out, due to your temperature, water conditions, how much minerals in your water, chlorine in your water, how much airflow, determines the length of the brew time. And you can actually, I think it's a great indication of where you're at in the tea cycle, because the population is going to increase and explode, and then it'll start eating itself, and the food's gone, and the poisons are in their excrements are in the water, so it actually poisons them, and then they'll die off. Mm-hmm. So the level of foam increases as how I look at it, is it increase. It is CO2 foam, is what it is. It's CO2 bubbles. So that's coming from the living, and it will go to a maximum and then die off. It's usually anywhere from 2 to 5 days. Typically, it's 2 days.
So if it's
days.
CO2, I would say that it's pretty fair to say that it's their exhalation. I mean, exactly. It might be their excretion too. But one way or another, it's their waste product.
It's respiration.
It is respiration.
Animals breathe in oxygen and mix it with water, and then in sugar in your body, and then you breathe out CO2. So mm-hmm. that's what we do. So mm-hmm. that is a good indication of the biological activity. And then not only that, the smell. I'm big on sweet, fresh, earthy smells, and I like the tea when it has a little bit of ocean smell because I have some fish in there. But sweet and earthy, and then once it'll die off, it'll sour a bit, and I'm not big on using it at that point. I think some people do, but at that point I like just to toss it in the compost pile.
Mm-hmm. So all right, so I brew my tea. I've made my little my bubbler, my 5-gallon, and I put my dose of powder in there, and it foams up, and I've reached my like apex of foam, right? Mm-hmm. So I know everything's the most alive, and feel free to tell me if I'm wrong. But at that point, I will take out the air, mm-hmm. and I will use it in one of two ways. Mm-hmm. Either I will walk out to my garden, mm-hmm. and I've got a smaller bucket, mm-hmm. and I'll just bucket it at 100%, mm-hmm. and I'll just put a little bit in whatever. How much I can spread it out, right? Mm-hmm. I'll put a dose, if you will, in everybody near where the stem is hitting the mm-hmm. soil, and then I just generally believe that I should finish it with a little bit of fresh water so it gets down more towards the roots. Is that how you do it?
Absolutely. You can dilute it before you do that, but it's a little more work, mm-hmm. carrying it around. But hand watering is really nice. There's always going to be a biofilm that some people like to pump it with drip lines, because some of these. They use it on big farms now, and the irrigation lines will get a biofilm inside. Hand watering,
clogging it, right?
So hand watering is labor intensive, but it's probably the best way. And I use it absolutely fresh, because you can't bottle a living. It dies in a bottle, because right. living things.
Shelf life would be like 72 hours.
It's not that long.
No, it's not even that long.
Well, I don't know how long it is, but there are some bottled teas, but. They can't be as good as a real fresh right out of.
You want the maximum numbers, so it's like brew it and use it.
The good thing about the biological activity is the bioorganisms is they're not really giving you NPK or any nutrients. They're just facilitating the transfer of the nutrients from the soil. So there's no real burning involved. You can dilute it. Some people dilute it 10-1. Some people use it pure. As a test. I like to maximize, push things to the limit. So I've used pure tea without any dilution on every watering throughout a cycle. and it's fine. I mean, things are a little bit too nitrogen-y. They're a little dark green, but everything is very healthy.
And for people whose plants don't look robust and dark green, like it's better to be on that side than the kind of emaciated and kind of yellowing kind of thing, because like the compost tea just makes them, you know, camouflage green, like serious.
And what you mentioned about foliar feeding, that's another thing. There's a lot of the good things going on there. But again, everything in nature is looking for somewhere to live and colonize. So when you add compost tea to the foliar, what happens is a lot of those microorganisms populate the leaf. And so when another mold comes along or a mite or something, that's actually physically taken up. They have to move on. So adding that high biodiversity to your plant itself, you can't see it, but it does colonize on your plant. Mm-hmm. It's a nice natural way for protecting your plant from a lot of other microorganisms.
So you're filling that vacuum.
Exactly.
Where like a spider mite or a powdery mildew or a future botrytis would become an opportunist and jump in there. You're like, no. We're going to fill it with these healthy microbes, so there's already somebody living there.
Exactly. Yeah. So many years in indoor, you try to, everything's so clean. It's just a real nice place for a predator to come in or something bad and take over. And that's why indoor growers can have real problems. There is no biodiversity. You know, and the more biodiversity you have, the better. I'm real sure of that.
So I've sprayed it foliar just a handful of times. I'm still experimenting with it, and actually the first time I did it, I sprayed it at 100%, and I came back the next day a little freaked out because I thought I had gotten some kind of purple powdery mildew, and it wasn't that at all. It was just that some of the droplets had dried with the compost, and so I just sprayed everything off and learned from it, right? But since you do use it all the time, what percentage of compost tea to fresh water do you recommend for foliar?
That's a good, and spraying too. If you have a really fine mist, there are some of those little animals are getting kind of big. So when you get put in those little micro bursts, it actually can shred them up and kill them. So you definitely don't want to have it on the high mist when you're doing it. Mm-hmm. I actually like to like when they're small, I dip them completely upside down into a fresh batch of tea.
That you dipped up, use a plant dip?
The entire thing. It's kind of like a flea dip or something, but just completely coat the plant. And then, and also the tea can have some residue in it, so you might want to strain it if you're going to spray it. But there's for mass scale, big sprayers are fine, but just don't have it a real fine mist, and you should be okay. And just do it before it's flowering. It's probably a good idea.
So, we've already kind of established that you can't really do it too much, right? Like if anything, your plant might become like, very dark green, and in many cases that's better than the opposite side. But if somebody wanted to do an optimized amount where they're benefiting the plant as much as they can, but they're also not overdoing it because they, a lot of, especially patients, right? They're on budgets, and they want to be able to use it, but not too much. So what would you recommend as a good regular feeding regime?
Typically what I do is I always like when I transplant, I like to water in tea to set that biological activity up front. Yeah. I'm a little lazy, so I don't brew that often. I might hit them 3 times, 4 times, and you can actually water it the day before you harvest. It's not, it's fine. But you can use it to the very end to the very beginning. Clones all the way to the very end, last days of flowering. I usually hit them 2 or 3 times, but I always like to hit them the first, once they're transplanted, just to set up that extra biological activity. And then, and another thing I think is kind of important for psychoactive plants, I think there needs to be a little bit of stress involved. Don't overwater your plants, I guess if you're going to err on the side of letting them droop a tiny bit instead of overwatering and keep the roots wet. So because your roots are real important to keep healthy. That's the beginning. That's the main where everything gets absorbed. So you want a lot of surface area on your roots. That's one thing about the tea. I actually have some biological activity to strip the roots of that old brown scale. So you should have nice white fluffy roots. So that was kind of engineered into the tea, which I think kind of makes it work really well. Is the number of ingredients I use to make healthy roots, because that's where it starts. So don't overwater the plant. So, but yeah, 2 or 3 waterings of fresh water and a tea water, you should be fine.
So to kind of unpack that a little bit, you're suggesting that at the beginning at transplant, maybe hit it 2 or 3 times in a row because you're building up the community. But after that, like maybe every third or fourth
Yeah,
watering.
I just hit it once. Just the first watering that when I transplant.
So you don't use it throughout the whole cycle?
No. Well, I do, but I'll use it maybe once when I first water, and then I might do 3 weeks of regular watering, and then hit them with tea again. When they transition from vegetation to flower, it's a good time to hit them because they need a bunch of nutrients at that point.
So are you suggesting that once? So it's starting to think. I'm trying to think about it more like an inoculant at this point.
Absolutely, it's an amazing inoculant.
So I'm putting it in, and I don't necessarily have to do it again every week.
Absolutely
because
not.
they're there. They
They're
live there.
That's right. As long as you have a nice healthy soil. And another issue is if you've used salts in your soil before, like one of those bud boosters called monopotassium phosphate. It's in all the big numbers for bloom boosters. That actually can just damage your soil and keep things from living and actually lock out certain nutrients. So if you have a good living soil starting off with, you don't have to keep the soil. The plant feeds itself from the soil. You just want a real healthy soil, and that's what Ocean Bounty does. It makes it a real wide spectrum of build a super soil.
Right on. All right. So I got one more question before we talk about how folks can get it, right?
Okay.
So I talk to a lot of folks, especially when I'm at conventions, right? And they're all like, we're doing 50 acres, and as soon as they say 50 acres, I'm thinking of mids, right? But a lot of these growers, who are even working big, a lot of these folks want to do, healthy probiotic at scale. And a lot of people who are small batch compost tea, living soil, maybe even Korean natural farming nerds like I am, they get to a point where they're like, all right, well that's fine for a home grower or a patient grow, but we're going to do a couple acres or more. You already mentioned once that you probably don't want to put the compost down your water line because there's residue. And
You have to be aware of that for sure.
So maybe just put water down your lines, but do you have any recommendations for people who want to scale it up to use it at size?
Well, yeah, absolutely. One of my jobs is I inspect farms for a program, so I do see a lot of big scale farms in Humboldt and Southern Oregon. And what's ubiquitous on these farms are dry ingredients and big tea brewers. They're there, 250 gallon pallet kind of square ones is kind of the minimum, up to they'll group 3,000-4,000 gallon tanks, but they're almost in every farm I see now because they are so beneficial and they're so cost effective. As far as a natural fertilizer, you can add in nutrients to feed your plants also. So it's actually one of the most cost effective ways, but it's done all the time. And they're just big reservoirs that they brew it up in. And for most of the commercial growers, the things that they're looking for are health of plant, right? Because you just need that, but also it helps resist pests, so that's good. And they want good yields, right? And this absolutely, compost tea boosts the yields. And then of course everybody needs bag appeal, right? And what I have found, and granted, I'm still pretty new at the compost tea thing, but my coloration seems to go up. The amount and variety of the colors in the hairs go up. I like to think that there's more trichomes. I don't know if that's true yet, but it seems to boost all the categories that you want if your end goal is to sell, right? Because there's some products we use at home when it's just for our head, right? But people who need to make their margins, they need to worry about these other categories, and I think it does all of that too. Yeah, it's that cost effective is real important on big scale farms. They're not using bottled nutrients. It's ridiculous to ship water. Yeah. So you add your own water on site and you save a substantial amount of money. So what was the question again? I think you already nailed it. Yes, it does increase your yields, your bag appeal. It helps and it maximizes the potential of genetics. It just allows that. So, thank you for that. It maximizes the potential of the genetics. Yes. I'm going to use that. That's what I think. That it's built in the genetics, but
you're letting it express itself fully.
And you do usually get a lot more terpenes. Things usually, it's kind of like tomatoes, you know, when you grow them in organic or a salt-based fertilizer, they're better, they taste better. It's hard to quantify, but it's
you know when you're using it.
The market knows it.
Yeah.
The market absolutely knows it. And people are becoming more and more aware, especially the pesticides and that, you know, you have to find other methods. And for years it was kind of a hidden, you know, a nasty part of our business. And but the consumers are important and they're more demanding, as they should be. So definitely the direction I see in the industry is definitely going organic and in high quality, and that's what it's just cost effective and it's a better product. There's no doubt about that.
I'm actually really excited about my tomato plants this year because, you know, I grow a few every year because, you know, even though you buy tomato plants at the store, it's still nice to have some at home, right? And so my tomato plants are near my personal patient plants, right? So just a few of them. And so, you know, I give some to my cannabis plants, which is why I originally got into it. But then, like, I'm giving some love to the tomato plants as well. So I'm looking forward to that experiment.
No, it works. Community gardens, I donate a lot, and they get amazing results in vegetable gardens. Yeah, compost teas help all plants. You know, I think they use them a lot in golf courses, and you know, it's just really it makes your plants healthy and inoculate. It's a great inoculate against it's just biodiversity. It's basically what you're doing.
Yeah, you're supporting nature to do nature in, like, maybe a bionic way.
It's a real interesting area. I believe it's just the tip of the iceberg of what we're finding out. There's tons of information readily available on brewing compost teas. It's not difficult, like you said. It seems a little daunting, but basically an air source, a vessel, and some clean water, and go from there.
Right on. So I get my tea when I come down here to, well, south of us, to Humboldt, when I go down to visit farms and stuff. I just get it locally down there. But, you know, I live up in Washington, and there's people watching the video who live all over the place. Where can people score this stuff, the happy endings tea mix? Like is it easy to buy?
Yeah, I hope so. Actually, we just got on Amazon. So you can go on Amazon.
Amazon's like universal.
It's free shipping. So I threw that in there. So yeah, go on Amazon and we'll get it. Or you can ask your local store, and I would love to be on store shelves. That's always great. But yeah, go on Amazon. It's universal.
So on Amazon, you'd want to Google Happy Endings Tea Mix?
Green Bicycles, which is probably, I spelled it different, Grean.
Oh, so catch that. It's Green Bicycles is the company, but it's Grean.
A brilliant marketing move, I must
say. Make it harder for people to find. Yeah, totally.
But anyways, yeah, if you search on Amazon, you'll get it. And it turns out there are people from Maine to Hawaii that are actually finding out about this through word of mouth, I imagine. But no, things are going real well. We want to sell a lot of it, and we're just starting to. And really glad to come down to my laboratory so we can talk about my product, and thank you.
Yeah, right on. And so if you want to make it really easy, you can look in the comments, and in the first comment there's going to be a link to it on Amazon, which makes everything easy. But hey, thanks for having me over.
Or you check my website.
What's your website? Yeah.
greenbicycles.com.
And also, let's plug your YouTube channel too.
Can I plug this thing right here?
That's beautiful. That's that's well done. So.
and this is legitimate. I don't know. Did you ever see the first High Times Cup in America?
No, I didn't know that. And they were using your product.
That was me.
Oh, that was you personally?
Yeah, that was mine.
Oh, right on.
I'm on that bad boy.
Awesome. Well, cool. Thanks for having me in your lab.
Glad to see you.
Take care.
Thank you, Django.
Awesome. Thank you.